What if the oldest story humanity remembers is not the beginning at all, but the aftermath of something far greater? An echo of a world reset long before our ancestors carved their first marks into stone. What if the images scattered across caves, deserts, and mountains are not symbols of imagination, but traces of encounters so profound that they bent the course of human history, and were then buried beneath layers of time, sand, and silence? Across continents that never touched, among cultures that never met, the same figures descend from the sky, the same luminous beings reshape the earth, the same warnings ripple through myth like the residue of an event too vast for human memory to hold. These stories were never meant to survive, and yet they do, etched in rock, whispered in ritual, encoded in civilizations that rose as suddenly as if remembering something they had once been taught. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. The first humans who pressed pigment against stone did not carve kings, conquests, or the triumphant rise of tribes. They carved what they could not forget. They carved the shapes that haunted their firesides long after twilight swallowed the horizon. Across deserts that would one day turn to sand, across rainforests still thick with ancient memory, across high cliffs where winds tore at the earth with the patience of eternity, a single pattern emerged. Beings who were not entirely human. Not imagined spirits, not drifting metaphors, but figures rendered with an attention so precise, so deliberate, that they feel less like myth and more like testimony. In the Tasili plateau of the Central Sahara, thousands of prehistoric paintings cling to the walls of rock shelters, quiet witnesses to a world that once breathed water and forests instead of dust. 10,000 years ago, the people who lived here painted the animals they hunted, the dances they performed, the rituals they preserved. And beside all of that, they painted something else. Towering figures with round, bulbous heads, limbs depicted as if weightless, helmets ringed with faint outlines like faint halos of machinery. Lines trail behind them like tubes or streams of force, and some float above the ground as though gravity was more a choice than a rule. Archaeologists have long called these scenes shamanic visions, images conjured by altered states. Yet the consistency across thousands of paintings suggests something more grounded. Visionary art varies wildly, yet these figures repeat with a precision bordering on intentional documentation. When early explorers called them the great Martian gods, they did not speak with scientific rigor, but with the uneasy instinct that these shapes were unlike any human depiction from their age. Hunters painted what mattered. They did not waste pigment on abstractions. If they returned to these same forms for generations, it was because they were trying to say something across time, the way a traveler might pile stones along a trail to guide those who follow. Half a world away, in Australia's rugged northern cliffs, the Wandjina stare down from ancient rock faces with blank white features and enormous black eyes. Their heads are circled by halos like atmospheric glow, their bodies draped in patterns that resemble cloaks or suits with layered segments. The Aboriginal elders say these beings came from the clouds, not metaphorically, but literally descending during storms, bringing rain, law, and the knowledge of survival. They shaped the rivers, they taught the cycles, and when their work was finished, they left as they came, rising back into the sky. To this day, descendants repaint the Wandjina so their presence continues, because without renewal, balance falters. These are not mythic embellishments to the people who guard their memory. They are ancestors who promised to return when the world needed correction. What makes the Wandjina hauntingly familiar is not their role, but their form. Their helmets mirror those in the Sahara. Their eyes resemble those on cave walls continents apart. Their bodies, elongated and serene, carry the same alien stillness. No trade routes connected these cultures. No shared language, no shared symbols. Yet the imagery matches as if describing the same kind of presence interpreted through different tongues. In the Italian Alps, carvings from Val Camonica show figures with rounded helmets and rays shooting outward like bursts of radiant energy. Some hold objects shaped like rods or staves emitting lines that resemble beams. Others stand beside star-like engravings that seem less symbolic and more like attempts to represent luminous force. These carvings predate European writing by millennia, yet their geometry suggests encounters with beings who commanded light the way humans command fire. Move west into the lands of the Hopi in North America, and the story deepens. The ant people, as the Hopi call them, were tall, dark beings with elongated craniums and large eyes. They guided humanity beneath the earth during catastrophes, one by fire, another by flood, protecting them until the surface calmed. These ant people are not insects. The word refers to their strength, their ability to dig, their resilience against heat and darkness. In songs, they are described as patient guardians who moved effortlessly between worlds and who returned to the stars when the time was right. This, the elders say, was not a metaphor. It was a memory. Further south in the rainforests of Brazil, cave paintings at Serra da Capivara show small humans dwarfed by towering figures with long arms and bulbous heads. Some scenes resemble instruction, one figure raising an arm while the smaller humans stand attentively. Nearby, geometric shapes descend like ladders or beams. Tribes still living there insist these images depict the Karajas, beings who taught agriculture and the secrets of timing the seasons. Their stories echo those of the Hopi, the Tasili, and the Wandjina, visitors who did not conquer but guided, then vanished. Across the mountains of southern Africa, the San Bushmen left their own record. Tall, thin beings whose silhouettes glow with radiating energy lines. Scholars try to interpret the glowing figures as shamans in ecstatic trance. But the San themselves speak of visitors from the sky, luminous beings who appeared during droughts, offering guidance before returning to the stars. Their memories stretch further back than most written traditions. Their rock art, layered over thousands of years, depicts the same recurring forms with unwavering detail. The deeper one travels into these ancient expressions, the clearer the pattern becomes. These images were not made by the same hand, nor born of the same cosmology. They were produced by isolated cultures separated by oceans, mountains, and eras. Yet they show beings with the same bodies, the same helmets, the same radiance, the same relationship to the sky. Mainstream explanations lean on symbolism, light as knowledge, helmets as ceremonial headdresses, flight as spiritual ascension. And perhaps some portions do reflect ritual imagination. But imagination does not explain identical motifs across continents with no contact. Imagination does not explain why humans who had never built cities, who had never seen metal tools, depicted beings who appear encased in suits, surrounded by force, moving without touching the ground. Before humans carved their kings, they carved their witnesses. Before history existed, there were those who saw something they could not name and tried desperately to leave a record for the future. The art of these first witnesses does not read like myth. It reads like fragments of a memory so old that only stone could preserve it. These figures, appearing at the very dawn of human expression, suggest that before civilization rose, before stories solidified into religion, before cultures drifted apart into continents of their own, humanity experienced something profound enough to anchor itself in every early artistic tradition. Something descended from the sky, taught, warned, revealed, and departed. And the world that followed grew from the shadow of that encounter. When the last ice retreated and the world shook itself awake from an age of extinction, something extraordinary happened. Something that archaeology still struggles to compress into tidy timelines and charts. Human societies, once scattered bands of hunters eking out survival at the margins of a harsh, unpredictable Earth, suddenly began to build. Not just shelters, not just hearths, but monuments, calendars carved into stone, cities aligned to the stars, and structures so precise that even modern engineers squint at them with disbelief. It is as if, almost overnight, a spark ignited across continents. And behind that spark lies a story whispered in every ancient civilization. That knowledge was given, not discovered. In Mesopotamia, long before empires rose and clay tablets carried the weight of kingship, a people called the Sumerians emerged from obscurity with brilliance so sudden it feels like a rupture in the normal pace of human development. They invented writing, cuneiform pressed into clay with such methodical clarity that it still speaks 6,000 years later. They built the first cities, complete with irrigation systems, administrative districts, laws, accounting systems, and even schools. They charted the movements of planets invisible to the naked eye, mapping the heavens with an accuracy that would not be matched again for millennia. And the strangest detail of all is that they never took credit for any of it. In their oldest tablets, the Sumerians attribute every innovation, writing, agriculture, mathematics, architecture, to the beings who came from the sky. They described these figures not as ethereal spirits, but as physical presences who descended in storms of fire and cloud. These gods, as later ages would call them, walked among humanity, organized labor, handed down laws, and returned to the heavens when their work was complete. One of their oldest words for these figures translates simply to those who descended. To the Sumerians, civilization was not their invention, it was their inheritance. Mainstream scholars explain these stories as mythologized memory, metaphor for human intuition and discovery. Yet the tablets themselves, meticulous, structured, and shockingly technical, do not read like allegory. They read like record. They describe measurements, landing places, lines of descent, and even disagreements between the gods regarding how much knowledge humanity should be allowed to keep. Whether literal or symbolic, the effect is undeniable. The Sumerians emerged from what should have been a slow climb upward with a fully formed blueprint of civilization in hand. Down the Nile, another civilization arose with similar abruptness. The ancient Egyptians spoke of a period called Zep Tepi, the first time, when luminous beings descended to bring order to a world still half swallowed by chaos. They taught language, medicine, engineering, and the principles of cosmic harmony. Their depictions of these gods, tall, radiant, sometimes animal-headed, were not mere decorations, but reflections of their belief that the foundations of their society had been shaped by visitors from the sky. The Egyptians built pyramids with engineering so exquisite that each side aligns almost perfectly to the cardinal directions, a feat requiring mathematical knowledge far beyond what conventional history assigns to their era. Their temples hum with astronomical precision. Their calendars track celestial cycles with nearly modern accuracy. For the Egyptians, architecture was memory. They constructed replicas of celestial order on Earth, embedding their understanding of the stars into stone. Pyramids echo the constellation Orion. Temples mirror the layout of the sky, Their myths insist that these designs were not born of human imagination, but were modeled after patterns shown to them by the gods. Patterns too perfect, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. On the other side of the world, deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya rose with the same enigmatic brilliance. They built cities woven with astronomical calculation, carving calendars so precise they could predict eclipses thousands of years in advance. Their legends speak of feathered, radiant teachers who arrived after a catastrophic flood to rebuild humanity. Among them was a being described as pale-skinned, bearded, and clothed in shimmering garments, who arrived on a vehicle that moved across the water without sails. He taught architecture, astronomy, and moral law. He promised to return. The pyramid at Chichen Itza, constructed so precisely that a serpent-shaped shadow slithers down its staircase at the equinox, is a monument to this era of instruction. Every stone is placed with a purpose, every angle measured to reflect the movement of the sun. It is architecture as testimony, built to ensure that the lessons of the sky would never be forgotten. Farther south, in the heights of the Andes, another teacher god emerged from a world reshaped by calamity. The Inca and their predecessors recorded stories of a luminous figure who rose from the waters of Lake Titicaca after a period of darkness and upheaval. He taught humans how to build, how to map the stars, how to cultivate crops in unforgiving terrain. Statues depict him holding rods or tools that look less like ceremonial objects and more like instruments of measurement, devices of precision. And in the ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, stones weighing more than 100 tons are cut and fitted with interlocking finesse that rivals modern machining. Whatever knowledge guided those hands was not primitive. Across the seas in India, some of humanity's oldest texts describe flying chariots, vimanas, used by the gods in war and travel. These chariots are not vague metaphors, but astonishingly detailed descriptions of propulsion, force, and aerial movement. They roar with sound, burn with fire, and ascend through the sky with deliberate control. Ancient temples still display carvings of machines with domed tops, mounted on platforms that emit flame. For generations, scholars dismissed these stories as poetic embellishments. Yet the specificity of the imagery, the continuity across centuries of text, hints at something deeper, a memory rendered into myth. In China, the earliest dynasties speak of dragons of light descending from the sky. Dragons not as serpents, but as radiant vehicles carrying divine teachers. The Yellow Emperor, a foundational figure in Chinese history, is said to have traveled on a flying chariot that shone like the sun. He brought with him knowledge of medicine, astronomy, the compass, and metallurgy. His reign marked a golden age of invention that seems to have materialized all at once. Again and again, across continents that never touched, the same pattern appears. Civilizations bloom suddenly with knowledge far beyond what came before. Their myths insist that the spark originated from above, from luminous beings who appeared during times of chaos and left when order was restored. Mainstream history labels these stories symbolic, but symbols do not align pyramids to Orion. Symbols do not teach planetary cycles, irrigation networks, or complex mathematics overnight. Symbols do not carve stones weighing hundreds of tons with millimetric precision. If these were merely legends, they would differ wildly from culture to culture. Yet they do not. The same themes recur with eerie consistency: descent, instruction, departure. The same shapes appear in art: round helmets, radiant bodies, beams of fire or light. The same worldview emerges: that humanity did not rise alone, but was guided by those who came from the sky. Something changed at the dawn of civilization. Something left its mark not only in myth, but in stone, in architecture, in engineering, in the very frameworks that allowed societies to flourish. And whatever that something was, every ancient culture, from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the peaks of the Andes, remembered it as the moment the world began anew. Art, more than any written record, holds the fingerprints of origins too old for language. Before alphabets cut symbols into clay, before chroniclers etched kingship into stone, early civilizations communicated their deepest truths through images, shapes meant to preserve what could not be forgotten. Yet across the ancient world, these images reveal something unsettling. They do not depict dreams. They do not depict abstractions. They depict beings who seem bound to a reality far more physical, far more structured than myth would suggest. These carvings, murals, and sculptures emerge from civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years, yet they present the same motifs again and again. Luminous figures, helmets, discs, machinery, radiant vehicles. Beings who descend and ascend, leaving profound transformations in their wake. In the dry heart of Egypt, where sand and sky blur into a single horizon of eternity, temple walls whisper stories through symbols so intricate that each carving becomes an entire universe of meaning. At Abydos, reliefs carved more than 3,000 years ago line the walls of the Temple of Seti I. Among them are shapes that, to modern eyes, resemble machines, forms akin to aircraft, vessels, and aerodynamic structures layered atop earlier inscriptions. Mainstream scholars call these palimpsests, visual coincidences formed by overlapping hieroglyphs. But even acknowledging that overlap requires acknowledging something else. The Egyptians carved their gods as the Shining Ones, beings who emerged from the stars to bring order to chaos. Their sky was not merely mythic, it was memory sculpted into stone. Above the Nile, in the Temple of Dendera, a massive circular relief spans the ceiling, a cosmic map depicting constellations, planetary orbits, and celestial bodies, arranged with a precision impossible to dismiss. The zodiac carved into this stone mirrors the heavens with startling accuracy, capturing star positions that align not only with Egyptian cosmology, but with astronomical layouts recognized by modern science. The inscriptions surrounding the relief speak of journeys through the heavens and the return of radiant beings who brought light to earth. It is a poetic phrase, but its poetic beauty does not diminish its implication. The Egyptians believed the most vital patterns of existence came from above, and they built monuments as reflections of that truth. If one travels west across the Atlantic, into the dense jungles of southern Mexico, the same patterns reappear with almost eerie clarity. Carved into the stone lid of a sarcophagus in Palenque, the image of the Maya ruler Pakal has fueled debate for decades. To archaeologists, it depicts the king descending into the underworld. But to any modern viewer, Pakal's posture seems unnervingly familiar. He sits, reclined within a chamber filled with structured mechanisms. His hands grip supports, his feet rest upon pedals. Flames or propulsion extend beneath him as though his seat were designed for ascent rather than descent. The platform beneath him displays swirling patterns that resemble exhaust or energy. This is not a mythic tableau of ethereal realms. It is mechanical imagery, rendered in a world that supposedly had no mechanical technology. The Maya did not carve random symbols. Every detail, every line, every curve had purpose. And the purpose here feels like an attempt to capture a real machine, seen through the lens of symbolic tradition. At Teotihuacan, the so-called City of the Gods, the same motif emerges across murals and carvings. Figures wearing angular helmets, rigid suits, and square adornments that appear almost technological. These figures stand beside geometric designs that could be interpreted as circuitry or cosmic architecture. Their presence in a city aligned with astronomical precision Its pyramids mirroring planetary distances and the layout of the solar system suggests that the builders were encoding knowledge tied not merely to devotion, but to an understanding of the heavens gained through contact or memory. The Aztecs later called this place the birthplace of gods, not because gods were imagined there, but because something transformative had occurred long before their arrival. Across the ocean, in India, temple carvings portray scenes from epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, stories in which sky chariots called vimanas traverse the heavens. These depictions, carved into stone blocks more than 2,000 years old, display domes, towers, and mechanisms mounted on platforms that emit flame or radiant force. The texts describe propulsion systems fueled by fire, engines that roar with thunder, and weapons that produce blinding heat. Scholars call this metaphorical imagery, an attempt to personify divine power. Yet the technical specificity challenges that assumption. These descriptions resemble functional mechanisms, rendered in language poetic enough to transcend centuries, yet grounded enough to raise questions. Why would poets describing divine abstraction resort to such structured mechanical detail? Myth and machinery rarely intertwine unless somewhere in memory machinery existed. In the arid plateaus of Mali, the Dogon people preserve another thread in this global tapestry. Their carvings depict elongated amphibious figures with large, staring eyes, representations of the Nomo, beings they claim descended from a spinning vessel amid fire and sound. According to Dogon oral tradition, these visitors imparted knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and the cosmic order. The Dogon have long known that the star Sirius has a dense, invisible companion, Sirius B, a fact modern astronomy confirmed only through telescopic observation in the 19th century. Skeptics propose cultural borrowing, coincidence, or lucky guesswork. Yet the Dogon insist their ancestors were taught directly, and their symbols carved into wood and stone reflect beings associated not with imagination, but with a celestial event. Travel north into Europe, and Bronze Age petroglyphs reveal another layer. In Sweden and Norway, ancient carvings depict circular discs hovering above human figures, lines trailing beneath them like beams of light or ladders. Some discs contain human silhouettes, others resemble sunships sailing across the sky. Archaeologists categorize them as solar symbols, metaphors for the journey of the sun. But the repeated inclusion of figures inside the discs pushes interpretation beyond simple iconography. These images depict structures, vehicles perhaps, occupied by humanoid forms. The precision, the repetition, and the geometric clarity suggest narrative more than metaphor. A story of descent, of arrival, preserved in stone. In Japan, clay dogu figurines from the Jomon period stand as some of the most enigmatic artifacts in ancient art. They are small, delicate sculptures with exaggerated features, yet unmistakably detailed. Their bodies are encased in what appears to be segmented armor. Their eyes are enormous, almond-shaped, and covered by goggle-like ridges. Tubes curve around their necks, plates protect their limbs. Archaeologists label them fertility idols, yet the logic of that classification falters under scrutiny. Fertility idols typically emphasize anatomy. Dogu obscure it beneath armor. They are unlike any other artifact in Japanese prehistory, standing alone as representations of beings whose forms echo descriptions found in cultures thousands of miles away. It is as though the Jomon people saw something extraordinary and attempted to capture it in the only medium they had. When these images, Egyptian, Maya, Indian, Dogon, Scandinavian, Jomon, are placed side by side, they form a mosaic spanning continents and millennia. And within this mosaic, patterns emerge: helmets, luminous bodies, flight, machinery. beings whose presence is as physical as it is divine. Mainstream interpretations attribute these similarities to archetypal projection. The human mind, they say, imagines power the same way everywhere. But archetypes do not wear segmented suits. Archetypes do not require goggles. Archetypes do not appear inside disks with beams beneath them, nor do they teach star positions invisible to the naked eye. The simplest explanation is often the most uncomfortable. These civilizations drew what they believed they saw. Their art is not symbolic fantasy, but memory, fossilized in pigment and stone. They were recording encounters with beings that challenged their understanding of reality, beings whose presence became the bedrock of their myths, their architecture, and the sudden leaps in knowledge that followed. If their images are testimony, then their monuments are archives, stone-built chronicles constructed to preserve what words could not hold. And as the ancient world shifted from art to architecture, the story they carried only grew louder. The monuments that rose in the wake of these encounters were not random expressions of devotion. They were messages to the heavens themselves, carved into the earth by those who believed they had once seen the sky open. Across the ancient world, as soon as humanity began inscribing memory into stone, another pattern surged upward toward the sky. Monuments so vast, so precise, and so improbable for their eras that they defy everything we expect of early civilizations. Before the rise of kings, before the emergence of writing, before metallurgy or organized states, human beings created structures that should not exist according to conventional timelines. They were built with knowledge far beyond what archaeological models typically allow, and yet they stand, weathered, silent, impossible to ignore. These monuments do not simply occupy space, they challenge the story of who we were and what forces shaped our beginnings. They rise like questions carved from the bones of the earth. In southeastern Turkey, buried beneath millennia of soil, lies Göbekli Tepe, the oldest monumental site humanity has ever uncovered. It predates pottery, it predates agriculture, it predates cities by thousands of years. And yet its design mirrors the sophistication of a civilization already well versed in engineering. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing more than 20 tons, stand arranged in circular sanctuaries. Their surfaces are carved with foxes, serpents, vultures, and symbols whose meanings scholars still cannot decode. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were nomadic hunter-gatherers, according to the archaeological record. They should not have had the ability to quarry, move, and erect stones on this scale. They should not have possessed the organizational capacity to gather hundreds of people for such a project. And yet, they did. Perhaps even more enigmatic is the fact that the builders deliberately buried Göbekli Tepe after centuries of use. They entombed it with thousands of tons of soil, as though sealing away knowledge meant only for a specific moment in time. Many of its pillars align with celestial points associated with Orion and Sirius, constellations tied to creation myths and sky beings in later cultures. Was Göbekli Tepe a sanctuary for ritual, a cosmic map, a message? Or was it the first attempt to replicate something witnessed in a sky that felt closer then than it does today? In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats rose centuries later, stepped towers constructed with mathematical precision, ascending like artificial mountains toward celestial realms. Each level represented a heavenly layer. Each summit housed a shrine for the gods. The great ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nana, stands as one of the clearest expressions of a worldview shared across ancient cultures, that the divine descended from above and could be reached through elevation. The word ziggurat itself comes from a term meaning to rise high. Yet these were not mere spiritual symbols. Their foundations align with celestial events. Their staircases mirror the pathways of stars, and in their construction, echoes of an older story linger, the belief that gods descended in storms, in fire, in thunder, and that these towers were meeting points between two worlds. The Sumerians, who built these monumental structures, wrote in their earliest tablets that the Anunnaki descended from the heavens to establish order. Whether metaphor or memory, the architecture that followed was a physical attempt to mirror the sky on Earth. Each ziggurat, each temple, each foundation stone seems less like an invention of human imagination and more like an imitation of a blueprint shown to them, a pattern repeated from the earliest sanctuary at Göbekli Tepe to the cities that later ruled the Fertile Crescent. Far across the ocean, in the Valley of Mexico, another city rose along the same cosmic alignment. Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods. Its builders remain anonymous. No written records identify who designed its massive pyramids, or why they abandoned the site centuries before the Aztecs discovered it. Yet the city's layout reveals a precision unmatched by most of the ancient world. The Avenue of the Dead runs straight for 2 miles, flanked by temples aligned to the sun, moon, and the stars of Orion's belt. The Pyramid of the Sun, one of the largest pyramids on Earth, is built atop a natural cave considered sacred to earlier cultures, a womb of creation, mirroring myths from around the globe. What hides beneath Teotihuacan is even more mysterious. Tunnels beneath the pyramids contain traces of mica, an element with heat-resistant and reflective properties. Mercury pools were discovered in chambers below, shimmering like liquid silver. Were these symbolic representations of the cosmos? Ritual tools for contacting the divine? Or remnants of a forgotten technology that ancient builders could only replicate through material metaphor? Whatever their purpose, the precision of Teotihuacan challenges the notion that this city rose solely from trial-and-error engineering. The builders seemed to be following instructions written not in text, but in memory. Memory of heavens mapped and beings descending. High in the Bolivian Andes, nearly 12,000 feet above sea level, lies the ruins of Pumapunku, perhaps the most baffling structure ever carved from stone. Here, massive andesite blocks, some over 100 tons, are cut with a precision so exact that they interlock like pieces of a machine. The faces of these stones are polished perfectly flat. Their angles meet with near mathematical perfection. Modern engineers struggle to replicate such craftsmanship even with diamond-tipped tools. The people of the region, long before the rise of the Incas, said these stones were shaped by the gods in a single night. They attributed the construction to Viracocha, the radiant teacher who emerged from Lake Titicaca after a great flood to restore order to the world. If these are merely legends, they are legends tied to stones that defy human ability for the time. Archaeological models cannot explain how people without advanced metallurgy or complex tools carved, transported, and assembled blocks of this scale. Nor do such models explain why similar engineering precision appears in civilizations that never interacted. The pattern repeats: sudden architectural leaps, celestial alignment, monumental ambition born not from gradual innovation, but from something that came before. Across the Mediterranean in Lebanon, the foundation stones of Baalbek stand as another enigma, the trilithon. 3 stones, each weighing over 800 tons, forms a base upon which the Romans later built their grand temple to Jupiter. Beneath this lies an even larger block, over 1,000 tons, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. No crane today can lift it with ease. No ancient technology, at least none recognized by mainstream archaeology, could have moved it. Yet someone did. And they did it with such accuracy that the stones rest perfectly fitted into their foundation bed. Local tradition claims the site was built by beings who came after the flood, instructed by those who descended from the sky. Whether myth or memory, the stones remain, challenging explanations that rely solely on human invention. Journey east again, into the dense Cambodian jungle, and Angkor Wat rises like a cosmic lotus from the earth. Built in the 12th century, its scale and symmetry still astonish modern architects. The entire complex mirrors the constellation Draco and the arc of the Milky Way. Its towers ascend in a pattern intended to be read from above. Its moats and canals align with solstices and equinoxes. Khmer inscriptions describe Angkor Wat not as an invention, but as a replication, a model of the heavens carved into the world. Its builders seem to suggest that their knowledge came from celestial instruction rather than incremental discovery. Across all these sites, Göbekli Tepe, the ziggurats, Teotihuacan, Pumapunku, Baalbek, Angkor Wat, the same elements recur. Sudden leaps in engineering, alignment to celestial bodies, architectural precision beyond the expected reach of their eras. And always, behind the stone, linger stories of beings who descended from the sky, who taught humanity, who promised to return. These monuments are not just relics. They are messages. They are the memory of a world interrupted and remade. They are the physical echo of an encounter that shaped the beginnings of civilization itself. And if we listen closely, they seem to say the same thing. Look upward, for that is where the story truly begins. For centuries, scholars, philosophers, and explorers have tried to explain why the same story echoes across civilizations that never crossed paths, why myths separated by oceans carry the same shapes, the same luminous beings, the same warnings of floods and fire and celestial descent. Archaeology can measure stones, anthropology can trace migrations, linguistics can map the branching of tongues. Yet none of these tools fully explain the deeper resonance, the uncanny repetition of narrative that binds the ancient world like threads pulled through time. When cultures rise independently, yet describe the same encounters, the question shifts from whether the stories are connected to how such a connection existed in the first place. And the answers proposed over the centuries reveal both the ambition and the limits of human interpretation. One of the earliest attempts to understand this global convergence came from Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who believed that humanity carries an inherited blueprint of the mind, a collective unconscious built from patterns older than individual memory. Jung argued that archetypes like the hero, the mother, the serpent, the god from above arise naturally across cultures because they reside deep within our shared psyche. In this view, the sky beings described in ancient myths are not literal entities, but expressions of the human longing for power, order, and origin. According to Jung's theory, early people projected their awe of nature onto the sky, shaping storms into spirits and constellations into divine watchers. It is an elegant framework, one that accounts for universal symbolism, but its strength is also its limitation. Archetypes explain the broad strokes, the sun as a father, the earth as a mother, but struggle to explain the technical specificity found in many ancient accounts. Archetypes do not typically wear helmets or radiate beams of light. Archetypes do not descend amidst thunder or teach mathematics, astronomy, or engineering. And archetypes certainly do not leave behind monuments aligned with precision to celestial bodies. Jung's theory shines in understanding stories, but it falters against stone and measurement. Another explanation, favored by many anthropologists, is cultural convergence. Human beings, regardless of geography, face the same natural cycles: day and night, storms and drought, hunger and abundance, life and death. It is natural to imagine that different societies, observing the same sky, would develop similar stories about it. When lightning splits the air, when a meteor streaks downward like a burning spear, when the sun seems to disappear during an eclipse, the imagination stretches toward the divine. In this perspective, stories of sky beings are simply the result of human minds interpreting shared environmental experiences. Cultural convergence is compelling, up to a point. It explains why ancient cultures revered the sky, but not why they described visitors descending from it. It explains symbolism, but not uniform anatomy. Round helmets, radiant bodies, elongated limbs, mechanical craft, structured suits. It does not explain why the same motifs appear carved in Algeria, painted in Australia, etched in Scandinavia, molded in Japan, woven into the Maya world, and preserved by the Dogon. Convergence may account for the desire to look upward, but not the memory of what was seen there. Then comes the theory that refuses to confine ancient brilliance to the mythic. The lost civilization hypothesis. Popularized in modern times by researchers like Graham Hancock, this idea suggests that before the end of the last ice age, before rising seas swallowed coastlines, there existed a civilization far more advanced than the fragmented tribes commonly described in textbooks. According to this view, humanity's sudden leap into agriculture, architecture, mathematics, and astronomy was not spontaneous discovery, but inheritance from survivors of this forgotten world. The survivors scattered across the globe after cataclysmic floods, carrying fragments of their knowledge to the places where civilization would eventually rise. This perspective bridges myth and material in a way some find irresistible. It echoes stories from Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, and the Andes, stories of gods who emerged after floods to rebuild the world. Göbekli Tepe's sudden architectural sophistication, appearing without precedent, fits neatly into this narrative. So does the mysterious precision of Pumapunku, or the astronomical knowledge encoded in Angkor Wat. Yet critics argue that without metal tools, written records, or unmistakable artifacts, the idea remains speculative. Absence of evidence, they say, is not evidence of absence. Still, the ocean hides its secrets well. 90% of prehistoric coastlines lie underwater, swallowed during the sea level rise that followed the last glacial melt. If a civilization thrived near ancient shores, as most do, it is entirely possible that its ruins now rest beneath depths untouched by modern excavation. The lost civilization theory does not claim certainty. It claims possibility. And possibility alone is enough to unsettle the strict timeline of human progress. Beyond human origins lies another idea, one far more controversial, yet strangely consistent with ancient descriptions: the extraterrestrial hypothesis. According to this view, the gods of the ancient world were not gods at all, but visitors from another world. The luminous beings carved into stone, the chariots of fire described in Indian texts, the sky serpents of Mesoamerica, the helmets and suits etched across continents. These were early attempts to describe technological encounters using the limited language available at the time. This theory explains the sudden leaps in human knowledge. It explains why ancient structures often mirror celestial geometry. It explains why early humans depicted their gods as physical beings who walked among them, rather than as abstract spirits. It even explains why many mythological events, storms of fire, beams of light, vehicles that ascend or descend, bear resemblance to technology. Yet the extraterrestrial hypothesis is hindered by one glaring issue: lack of physical evidence. Without hardware, without remains, without unmistakable artifacts, the idea remains suspended between intrigue and speculation. And yet, the consistency of ancient accounts keeps the theory alive, a reminder that absence of proof is not proof of absence. A more metaphysical approach proposes the interdimensional theory, the notion that the beings described in ancient myths did not come from another planet, but from another reality entirely. This idea draws on modern physics, which entertains the possibility of parallel dimensions and overlapping fields of existence. In this model, the radiant figures seen by early humans were entities whose reality intersected with ours only briefly. Their appearances in ritual, in trance, or during moments of cosmic upheaval were not interventions from the stars, but from layers of existence normally hidden from perception. To ancient eyes, an interdimensional encounter would appear indistinguishable from divine visitation. Light, sound, and form might behave in ways that defy physical expectation. Such beings could emerge suddenly and vanish just as quickly. They could appear luminous, larger than human, or encased in forms that resist easy explanation. This theory respects the mystical tone of many myths, while accounting for the physical details embedded in ancient art. Yet no single explanation resolves the puzzle. Psychological archetypes illuminate the human mind, but not the stone monuments. Cultural convergence explains shared symbolism, but not identical anatomy. The lost civilization theory fills gaps in technological development, but offers no proof beyond pattern. The extraterrestrial idea aligns elegantly with ancient descriptions, but lacks incontrovertible evidence. The interdimensional model accounts for the surreal nature of many encounters, but cannot be verified. What all these theories reveal is that humanity has been asking the same question since the beginning. Who were the visitors described in our oldest stories? Were they gods, ancestors, teachers, or something far more complex? These theories are not competing answers. They are overlapping possibilities, the outlines of a mystery too vast for a single viewpoint to contain. What remains undeniable is the pattern itself. Civilizations separated by thousands of miles told the same kinds of stories. Their myths describe the same sequence: descent, instruction, departure. Their art captures the same forms. Their monuments align to the same stars. Their knowledge leaps forward not gradually, but suddenly, as though ignited by something beyond themselves. Whether that something was memory, imagination, instruction, or intervention, the ancient world carried it like a torch passed from generation to generation. And the monuments, myths, and mysteries they left behind continue to whisper the same unsettling truth. At the dawn of history, humanity did not stand alone. Across the ancient world, the deepest mysteries are not found in myths or monuments alone. They are found in the strange convergence of stories, symbols, and structures that should have had no way of influencing each other, yet somehow echo the same truths. When civilizations separated by oceans describe identical beings who descend from the sky, teach humanity, and then vanish, the pattern becomes too large to dismiss. And when their greatest structures, the pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the temples of Cambodia, the stonework of the Andes, mirror celestial patterns with exact mathematical precision, the question shifts from, did they imagine this? To, what were they trying to preserve? Somewhere in that convergence lies a truth deeper than any single theory can capture. As the world began to rise from the shadows of the last great catastrophes, floods, volcanic eruptions, sudden climate shifts, humanity faced crises that threatened its survival. In these moments of upheaval, myths say the sky opened. Not metaphorically, but literally. They speak of great storms of fire, thunderous descents, radiant beings stepping out of shimmering vessels, guiding the desperate towards safety or knowledge. The Hopi tell of ant-like guardians who led survivors beneath the ground, protecting them from a world aflame. The Dogon recount beings whose craft spun down from the heavens, splashing into the earth with fire and noise. The ancient Chinese describe dragons of light streaking across the sky, carrying teachers who would seed the first dynasties. To later generations, these stories became divine myth, but to those who lived through them, they may have been memories of events too extraordinary to describe in ordinary terms. The aftermath of these encounters produced a kind of renaissance, one not born of slow accumulation, but of sudden ignition. Around the world, mathematical systems appeared seemingly out of nowhere. In Mesopotamia, Base 60 counting systems allowed astronomers to calculate celestial cycles with precision that still underpins our modern measurement of time. In the Andes, Quipu knot systems encoded information in threads, functioning as data storage long before written language appeared. In the Indus Valley, city grids with advanced drainage systems emerged fully formed, as though built according to a blueprint rather than experimentation. These were not gradual developments, they were leaps, as if a switch had been flipped within the human mind. And always, behind these leaps, is the same whisper. The knowledge came from above. In Egypt, scribes wrote that Thoth, the god of wisdom, handed writing to humanity. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl brought mathematics and astronomy. In India, the gods of the Vedas imparted architecture and weaponry. In Peru, Viracocha taught agriculture and measurement. These figures appear as radiant, towering, and otherworldly. They do not resemble the tribes they instruct. Their presence is described not as mythic metaphor, but as physical reality. Modern scholars argue that these tales are symbols, ways of crediting human innovation to divine inspiration. Yet symbols rarely behave with such consistency. Symbols do not teach star cycles that require centuries of observation. Symbols do not carve blocks weighing hundreds of tons with laser-like precision. Symbols do not appear simultaneously across continents with anatomical and technological details that match each other. If these were simply stories, they would vary wildly. But they do not. One of the most striking global parallels lies in the alignment of ancient monuments. The Great Pyramid aligns almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. Angkor Wat mirrors the constellation Draco. Teotihuacan reflects the layout of the solar system. Stonehenge tracks solstices with the accuracy of a modern observatory. The Nazca Lines, sprawling across the Peruvian desert, form shapes visible only from above, patterns that make sense only if their creators expected someone to see them from the sky. Ancient builders did not aim blindly upward. They placed their stones with an intelligence that suggests they were replicating a design philosophy rather than inventing one. As these societies rose, their religious systems crystallized around a single idea: that humanity was once taught by beings who came from the heavens. The Sumerians wrote of Anunnaki rulers who walked among humans. The Egyptians spoke of gods who lived on earth during Zep Tepi, before returning to the stars. The Maya carved scenes of descending serpents of light, combining divine symbolism with unmistakable imagery of aerial movement. In Hindu texts, the Vimanas, flying chariots, move through the sky with descriptions of engines, propulsion, and sound so detailed they could almost be technical manuals. For thousands of years, these stories were treated as myths, but the deeper we examine them, the more they resemble cultural memories passed through the filter of limited language. A tribe with no word for craft describes it as a chariot. A society without metallurgy describes suits as skin or armor. A culture that worships the sun interprets radiant beings as gods of light. Myth becomes the vehicle for truth, not its opposite. Even rituals across distant cultures carry the same traces. In Australia, Aboriginal people still repaint Wandjina figures because the being's presence must be renewed. In China, rituals honoring the sons of heaven echo ancient beliefs that rulers descended from celestial visitors. In Africa, Dogon ceremonies reenact the arrival of the Nomo through drums meant to mimic the sound of their vessel. In Mesoamerica, priests perform ceremonies aligned with celestial events, believing the sky beings would return when the stars matched the ancient patterns. Why would cultures separated by time and geography create rituals for the return of beings that never existed? Unless, at some distant point in their past, those beings did. The scientific lens tries to reduce these stories to psychology, astronomy, or symbolic storytelling. And while these explanations carry weight, they never fully address the architectural realities, the precision, the scale, the impossibility of what ancient societies accomplished with the tools history assigns them. The interdimensional theory attempts to reconcile the physical with the metaphysical, arguing that the beings described in ancient texts were neither human nor extraterrestrial, but intrusions from another layer of reality. It is an idea that resonates with the luminous quality of many ancient depictions, beings described as radiant, translucent, or moving with unnatural fluidity. But even that theory answers only part of the puzzle. The extraterrestrial hypothesis explains the technological imagery, but not the metaphysical experiences embedded in many rituals. The lost civilization model explains the sudden appearance of engineering and astronomy, but not the global consistency of the sky visitor narrative. No framework fits all evidence cleanly. And perhaps that is because the truth is not singular. It may be layered, just as myths are layered. History wrapped in symbolism, memory wrapped in metaphor, reality wrapped in time. What is certain is that ancient people believed their world was shaped by forces greater than themselves. They did not imagine this idea, they inherited it. Something in their distant past ignited a reverence for the sky so profound that entire civilizations oriented their lives, their religions, and their architecture toward it. They built monuments not merely to honor the heavens, but to communicate with them. Whether these beings were gods, ancestors, travelers from another star, or visitors from another dimension, their presence carved itself into the foundations of civilization. And the deeper we look, the more the ancient world seems less like a random emergence and more like an awakening, guided, accelerated, shaped by something that left its imprint in stone. If the ancient world preserved its memories in stone, then the great civilizations preserved them in the turning of ages, cycles of rise and collapse that mirrored the rhythms of catastrophe described in their oldest stories. Again and again, cultures across the planet spoke of worlds destroyed and rebuilt, of epochs ending in fire or flood, of survivors guided by luminous beings who emerged when humanity stood at the edge of extinction. These tales do not appear as isolated myths. They form a global chronology of upheaval, a pattern so persistent that it feels less like imagination and more like generational memory, distorted by time, but never erased. And when these stories are woven together, they suggest that the appearance of sky visitors was not random, but cyclical, arriving at moments when the world was most vulnerable. Among the Sumerians, the earliest surviving texts describe a succession of ages, each ending with cataclysm and renewal. After every collapse, the gods descended once more to re-establish order, bringing knowledge back to humanity as though restoring a system wiped clean. In Egypt, temple inscriptions speak of multiple eras called Zep Tepi cycles, each one beginning with the descent of radiant beings who restored balance after chaos engulfed the land. The Maya carved their calendar around cycles of destruction and rebirth, believing that the end of each age marked the return of sky beings who had guided their ancestors through ancient floods. In the Andean highlands, stories of Viracocha describe him appearing after periods of darkness, when the world was broken and humanity scattered. He rebuilt civilization, taught survival, and vanished again across the sea. These cycles echo geological and climatic realities: volcanic winters, rapid sea level rise, meteor impacts, and sudden droughts. But the narrative details go further. They suggest intervention. The Hopi warn of previous worlds destroyed by fire from above, not as metaphor, but as memory. The Aboriginal Australians speak of a sky that once cracked open, releasing thunderous beings who reshaped the land with impossible power. In India's ancient epics, the end of ages is marked by weapons of fire brighter than the sun, producing descriptions hauntingly similar to nuclear-level devastation. To the people who lived through these events, the boundary between divine wrath and cosmic catastrophe blurred. Yet always, in the wake of destruction, came the return of the luminous teachers, the resetters, the rebuilders. If these stories contain even fragments of truth, then the visitors who shaped early civilizations appeared not randomly, but during moments of global vulnerability. These beings were not merely observers, they were agents, whether benevolent, corrective, or acting under motivations lost to time. Their pattern of descent after catastrophe is too consistent to ignore. And woven into these narratives is another theme, a warning that their return is tied to cycles we barely understand. In the Dogon tradition, the Nommo promised they would come again when the sky turned red and the star Sirius shifted position. In Chinese cosmology, the sons of heaven were said to reappear when dynastic cycles reached their breaking point, signaling the start of a new age. The Aztecs believed Quetzalcoatl would return at the end of the fifth sun, the age in which we now live, after a sequence of cosmic disasters repeated across epochs. Even the Greeks, often interpreted through the lens of myth rather than cosmology, described ages of bronze, silver, and gold separated by divine intervention, each transition marked by beings descending or withdrawing from the world. It is as though ancient cultures tried to tell future generations, the pattern is not finished. Behind these cycles lies another mystery, the sudden disappearance of the sky visitors themselves. For thousands of years, they appear as active participants in human development. They teach, they guide, they build alongside early civilizations. And then, without warning, they vanish. Not gradually, but abruptly, leaving behind monuments that point upward, as if yearning for their return. In Egypt, the gods withdraw into the sky at the end of Zep Tepi, leaving pharaohs as their earthly proxies. In Sumer, the Anunnaki retreat to the heavens after establishing kingdoms, taking their knowledge with them. In India, the gods depart at the end of the Mahabharata age, leaving humans to rebuild in a fractured world. The Maya speak of Kukulkan returning to the sky on a serpent of fire, promising to come back when humanity once again needs guidance. The Inca witnessed Viracocha walk across the ocean, disappearing into the horizon as though stepping through a rift in reality. These are not the endings of invented gods. They're the endings of presences described with too much detail, too much physicality to dismiss as fantasy. What could cause such beings, whatever their nature, to withdraw from the world so suddenly? One possibility is that their purpose was fulfilled. Another is that environmental or cosmic cycles forced them to depart. A third is more unsettling. They left because humanity was entering an age in which their presence would no longer be tolerated or understood. The rise of empires, warfare, and competition for resources may have made open intervention impossible. If humanity became unpredictable, volatile, or dangerous, the visitors may have retreated behind the veil of myth, becoming stories rather than rulers. But what did they leave behind? Across the world, the traces of their influence remain etched into architecture, mathematics, cosmology, and ritual. The Great Pyramid's alignment, Göbekli Tepe's celestial geometry, the Nazca lines, the precision of Machu Picchu, the astronomical layout of Teotihuacan. These structures act like beacons, oriented toward the sky as if awaiting recognition from above. Many ancient texts explicitly state that these monuments were built in the likeness of the heavens, by instruction of the gods, or as a memory of what descended. Humanity, unable to replicate the visitors' technology, did the next best thing. It built in stone what it once saw in light. In the wake of their departure, civilizations shifted from collaboration to imitation. They crafted rituals intended to recreate the conditions of contact. The Egyptians used incense, vibration, and alignment to draw sky beings back to Earth. The Maya performed ceremonies synchronized to celestial cycles, believing the heavens themselves were a communication system. The Vedic priests mimicked the thunder of the Vimanas through chants and fire rituals, attempting to invoke the return of the gods. These efforts preserved not only myth, but a longing, a sense that humanity had once lived in the shadow of beings whose knowledge far surpassed their own. Yet as centuries passed, memory distorted into legend. Stories hardened into religion. Symbols replaced direct experience, and the visitors themselves faded into the background of human consciousness. What remained was the echo of something extraordinary, too extraordinary to fit neatly within the constraints of modern academic frameworks. If the ancient world reflects a cycle of contact followed by withdrawal, then humanity today lives in the silent interval between ages. But silence is not absence, and the monuments pointing skyward, the myths of return, and the global uniformity of ancient testimonies suggest that the story is not closed. It is paused. What the ancient civilizations described may not be miraculous, divine, or supernatural. It may be cyclical, predictable, and still unfolding. And if the sky visitors came at the dawn of the last age, then the question is not whether they existed, but whether humanity is approaching the next turning of the cycle, the moment when the sky opens again, and the world that forgets will remember. As the echoes of ancient contact fade into dust and ritual, another mystery rises to take their place, one rooted not in carvings or monuments, but in silence. A silence that stretches like a shadow across all early civilizations, a silence that begins the moment the sky visitors disappear from the historical record. For thousands of years, humans recorded encounters with luminous beings who came from above, shaped their world, and withdrew without explanation. But when the visitors vanished, something else emerged. Questions too large for language, doubts too profound for the limited frameworks of early culture, and a void in understanding that later societies tried desperately to fill with myth, religion, and philosophy. These stories, stripped of context and retold over generations, became echoes of a forgotten truth. A truth ancient people may have struggled to articulate even as they witnessed it. To unravel the deeper thread beneath these stories, we must turn not to legend alone, but to the global puzzle of sudden human advancement. One of the most striking phenomena in ancient history is how abruptly complexity appears. In many regions, humanity jumps from primitive subsistence to sophisticated urban planning, astronomy, engineering, and mathematics with almost no transitional stages. The Sumerians do not gradually learn to write, they simply begin writing. The Egyptians do not slowly experiment with stone, they suddenly build pyramids of immense accuracy. The Maya do not inch toward calendar creation, they unveil a system so precise it rivals modern astronomical calculation. And at the root of each leap sit myths of beings who brought knowledge from the sky. If these accounts are merely symbolic, why do they correlate so tightly with actual technological acceleration? Why do civilizations that claim to have been taught by sky visitors tend to be the same civilizations that develop highly advanced architecture and astronomy? It is as though memory became infrastructure, myth became blueprint, and the stories of luminous teachers shaped the very foundations upon which society grew. But the mystery deepens when we examine the nature of the knowledge itself. Much of what ancient civilizations understood required centuries of careful observation, or access to knowledge far beyond their technological capacity. The Sumerians mapped planetary orbits with shocking precision. The Dogon described the invisible companion star of Sirius long before telescopes existed. The Maya calculated solar cycles with an accuracy that defies the tools available to them. Egyptian builders aligned monuments to cardinal directions with margins so small they rival modern surveying equipment. Where did this knowledge come from? Mainstream explanations rely on lost observations, trial and error, or coincidence. Yet coincidence repeated across continents becomes something else: pattern. And patterns repeated across eras become legacy. It is within this legacy that we begin to understand the silence left by the visitors. If they withdrew deliberately, they left behind fragments, seeds meant to be nurtured, not instructions meant to be perfectly preserved. Their departure created a vacuum humanity struggled to fill, and into that vacuum poured stories, reinterpretations, distortions, and religious narratives that carried pieces of truth wrapped in metaphor. What early civilizations remembered as shining beings, later cultures reimagined as deities. What were once descriptions of technology became symbols of divine power. What were once encounters became visions, and what were once memories became myths. But silence is not absence, it is transition. And in that transition, new thinkers emerged. Across Greece, early philosophers began to question the nature of the cosmos, not merely as a spiritual construct, but as a structured reality governed by rules. They speculated about other worlds, other beings, other levels of existence. Anaximander suggested that life originated in realms beyond Earth. Democritus envisioned infinite worlds inhabited by forms unknown. Plato hinted that the gods of myth were intermediaries between worlds, not creators. These ideas did not arise from nowhere. They were shaped by older myths, by whispers of encounters preserved in the traditions of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. In India, Vedic scholars expanded on ancient epics, exploring the concept of multiple realms, lokas, each inhabited by beings with different forms, different lifespans, different abilities. The sky was not simply the domain of stars. It was a layered structure of existence. In China, Taoist thinkers described travelers who could move between worlds through mastery of subtle forces. Even the Hebrews spoke of beings descending from the heavens in fiery chariots, beings described not as ephemeral spirits, but as physical entities capable of interacting with the world. This philosophical shift suggests that ancient contact may have left a deeper impression than monuments alone reveal. The stories of sky visitors did not simply vanish. They evolved into frameworks for understanding the cosmos. And yet, as civilizations rose and fell, the clarity of these ideas faded. The visitors became mythologized. Their technology became divine symbolism. Their physical presence transformed into metaphor. But not everything turned to metaphor. Some details remained stubbornly literal. In texts from India, the descriptions of vimanas resemble machines. In Mesoamerican carvings, figures sit within vehicles detailed enough to mimic cockpits. In Egyptian inscriptions, objects resembling aerial craft appear in layered reliefs. In Scandinavian petroglyphs, discs emit beams of light. In Japanese dogu figurines, suits and goggles reflect something more than ceremony. These details anchor the mythic within the physical and suggest that the silence following the visitor's departure did not erase memory. It transformed it into material culture. Yet the greatest mystery of all lies not in what the visitors gave, but in what they withheld. If they taught early civilizations how to build, calculate, and observe the heavens, why did they leave humanity to struggle with war, famine, disease, and collapse? Why did they vanish before their teachings could stabilize the world? Were they limited by their own constraints, cosmic, temporal, or ethical? Were they acting under rules we cannot comprehend? Or was humanity itself unprepared for sustained contact, still too volatile to receive knowledge without misusing it? The abrupt withdrawal of these beings suggests a boundary, one that ancient people sensed but could not articulate. Many myths speak of forbidden knowledge, secrets the gods refused to share. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki debate how much wisdom humans should receive. In Greek stories, Prometheus is punished for giving humanity fire, a metaphor for technology. In Hebrew traditions, the Watchers teach forbidden arts and are cast down for it. In Indian lore, the gods impose limits on human power, fearing the consequences of unrestricted knowledge. These narratives hint at a deeper truth. Early humans may have encountered beings who operated under constraints, cosmic rules, ethical frameworks, or consequences too grave for us to understand. And so, the silence grew. Humanity rose into an age where the memory of contact remained, but the contact itself faded. Religions crystallized around symbols. Monuments became ruins. Knowledge dissolved into ritual. What was once experience became belief. Yet the orientation of ancient monuments, the global consistency of myths, and the sudden leaps of early civilizations remain as clues suggesting that the silence is not an ending, but a pause. If the visitors arrived during moments of catastrophe and retreated when humanity reached a stage of fragmentation, then their absence may reflect not abandonment, but anticipation. Ancient traditions repeatedly insist that they will return at the end of a cycle, when the world once again stands at a threshold. Today, humanity faces challenges that mirror those ancient turning points: environmental instability, technological upheaval, global uncertainty. If history follows the cycle described in myth, then silence may not be permanent, and the sky that once opened may open again. As the ancient world's echoes travel across time, a final, unsettling question emerges, one that lingers between myth and memory, history and speculation. What truly happened when humanity first looked to the sky and claimed to see beings descending from it? Every culture insists the same thing. These were not dreams, not metaphors, not visions born from hunger or firelight. They were encounters that shaped the trajectory of civilization, the architecture of belief, and the mysterious accelerations in human development that still defy explanation. But when we examine the evidence with modern eyes trained by science, technology, and an understanding of the cosmos unimaginable to ancient people, the story becomes even stranger. The myths do not shrink under scrutiny, they expand. Because if humanity has always been alone, why do the earliest chapters of our story feel like a conversation with someone else? Modern researchers have attempted to solve this mystery from different angles. Some hunt for physical proof, anomalous artifacts, inexplicable structures, scars burned into the earth. Others examine the myths themselves, analyzing linguistic patterns, shared motifs, and parallels too precise to dismiss. But perhaps the most revealing perspective comes not from archaeology or folklore, but from astrophysics. We now know that the universe is crowded with planets, hundreds of billions of them, many orbiting stars older than our Sun. We know that life could have emerged countless times under conditions far older, far more stable, far more advanced than Earth's turbulent adolescence. Statistically, humanity is unlikely to be the first, the earliest, or the only. And if we are not the first, then the possibility that someone else reached us long ago becomes less a fantasy and more a mathematical expectation. Ancient civilizations would not have had the vocabulary to describe spacecraft, energy fields, propulsion systems, or beings evolved under different conditions. They would have described what they saw using the only language available: gods, serpents of light, chariots of fire, shining ones. They would have stored the memory in ritual, architecture, and oral tradition. And when millennia passed, those memories hardened into myth. Consider how early civilizations responded to these encounters. None reacted as though they had experienced hallucinations or visions. They responded with construction. Pyramids, observatories, ziggurats, calendars, star maps. They responded with alignment, building structures that mirror Orion, Sirius, Draco, the Pleiades. They responded with imitation, crafting vessels in art that resemble the shapes they saw descend from the sky. If the visitors were figments of imagination, why would entire civilizations reorganize their world around them? Why would their greatest monuments point upward rather than inward? This upward orientation is perhaps the most profound clue. The Great Pyramid aligns with the stars of Orion's belt not by accident, but by design. The Giza complex mirrors the layout of the heavens as they appeared during a time long before its construction, suggesting a memory passed through generations. Across the globe, Teotihuacan's temples reflect planetary distances, as though the builders were encoding celestial relationships into stone. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat becomes a map of the cosmos carved into earth. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert like messages meant to be seen from the sky. These designs do not reflect humanity reaching for the divine. They reflect humanity remembering something once seen above them. But memory alone does not explain the sudden bursts of knowledge that followed ancient encounters. The rise of writing, mathematics, astronomy, and engineering did not unfold gradually. They ignited, as if humanity had been given fragments of a larger framework, pieces of a cosmic puzzle that early civilizations tried to reconstruct. And yet, as technology vanished or was misunderstood, societies filled the gaps with mythic symbolism, preserving the shape of knowledge even when its meaning faded. One of the strangest elements within these myths is consistency in physical description. Beings of light, figures wearing suits or armor, large, luminous eyes, devices that emit fire, light, or sound, vehicles that ascend vertically, depart with thunder, or glide without wings. These descriptions appear in Aboriginal cave art, in Mayan stelas, in Sumerian tablets, in Egyptian reliefs, in Norse carvings, in Japanese dogu sculptures. Cultures that never met, separated by oceans and thousands of years, depicted the same forms. Skeptics say these similarities prove nothing, but if imagination alone produced such imagery, we would expect wild, unconnected diversity, not recurring motifs that align with startling precision. This leads to a deeper possibility, one that challenges both traditional myth and modern skepticism. Perhaps the beings described in ancient texts were neither gods nor extraterrestrials in the conventional sense. Perhaps they were something more complex, something that intersects with humanity only at certain moments in history, something bound by laws or cycles we cannot yet perceive. Some researchers argue that these visitors could have been time travelers, descendants of humanity returning to guide their ancestors during pivotal moments. But time travel demands technologies and paradoxes far beyond current understanding, and ancient accounts rarely portray the visitors as human-like in origin. Others propose that the visitors emerged from parallel dimensions, realities coexisting with our own, intersecting occasionally in conditions of extreme stress, ritual, or catastrophe. This idea aligns with myths describing beings who appear suddenly and vanish just as quickly, moving not through space, but through layers of existence. Another theory suggests that the visitors were remnants of a long-forgotten terrestrial civilization, survivors of an advanced society wiped out by the disasters at the end of the last ice age. If such a society mastered technologies that left little durable trace, its survivors could easily have been perceived as divine. But this explanation struggles to account for global consistency and the celestial orientation of the monuments left behind. The extraterrestrial hypothesis remains the most provocative, yet also the simplest. Ancient people witnessed visitors from another world. But even this explanation does not fully address the metaphysical qualities described in many myths: the luminous bodies, the altered perception of time, the blending of physical and non-physical attributes. Perhaps ancient encounters represent a phenomenon that cannot be reduced to a single category: technological, spiritual, dimensional, or evolutionary. Perhaps they were all of these at once. Regardless of origin, one truth remains: these encounters reshaped humanity. They left marks not only on stone, but on consciousness. They seeded the idea that we are not alone, that we are part of a story older and larger than our species. They set into motion questions that still haunt us today. Who were they? Why did they come? And why did they leave? Because leave they did. Almost every civilization describes a final departure, a moment when the gods, teachers, or shining ones returned to the sky, and after that departure came a void. Knowledge fractured, empires rose and fell, stories transformed. Rituals remained, but contact ended. It is as though humanity had been given a spark, but not the flame. Tools to build a world, but not the understanding to sustain it. Now, thousands of years later, humanity stands once again at a threshold. We have rediscovered the stars. We search for worlds beyond our own. We build machines capable of piercing cosmic darkness. And in doing so, we find ourselves repeating the gestures of our ancestors, looking upward, waiting for something to return. The question is no longer whether the ancient visitors existed, but whether the ancient cycle is repeating, whether silence is the prelude to another descent, whether humanity is approaching the next moment when myth and reality converge and the sky opens once more, not for story, but for memory. If the ancient world is a fragmented archive of encounters, then our world is the quiet aftermath, a civilization living in the shadow of a story we no longer remember how to read. Yet something in us still feels that forgotten beginning, as though the memory of contact lingers beneath consciousness. The same impulse that drove the Sumerians to carve star charts into clay now drives us to map galaxies. The same longing that made the Egyptians build monuments aligned to Orion now fuels telescopes aimed at exoplanets. The same intuition that inspired the Maya to encode cosmic cycles into their calendar now pushes scientists to search for extraterrestrial signals. Humanity behaves as though it is trying to re-establish a connection lost in antiquity, guided by an instinct older than recorded history, a subtle inheritance from a time when the sky was not silent. The more we learn, the more the ancient stories begin to look less like myth and more like early attempts to articulate a truth too large for their era. We now understand that the universe is unimaginably vast, that other worlds exist in staggering numbers, that life may be common, intelligence perhaps inevitable. Even conventional science now entertains ideas once relegated to legend: panspermia, multidimensional space, cosmic cycles, eras of cataclysm and renewal. As our knowledge expands, the stories of our ancestors begin to feel uncomfortably familiar, as though they were describing phenomena that modern physics is only just beginning to understand. Across those ancient narratives, the sky visitors were not omnipotent gods, but advanced beings bound by laws, cycles, or constraints. They intervened during crisis, departed suddenly, and always left behind warnings or promises of return. Many cultures insisted that the visitors would come again at a turning point in human history, when the world entered a new age of upheaval. And now we stand in one. Our climate is shifting. Our technologies accelerate faster than our ethics can manage. Artificial intelligence blurs the boundaries of identity. Space travel moves from myth to engineering. Humanity begins to resemble the civilizations described in ancient decline myths, societies approaching a crossroads where the next step determines whether the world collapses or transforms. For the first time since antiquity, we possess the means to send signals into space, to decode cosmic radiation, to search for anomalies in the fabric of reality. We are no longer bound solely to Earth, and that shift raises a question older than civilization. What happens when a species begins to rise toward the domain of its teachers? Perhaps this is why ancient cultures emphasized humility before the heavens. The Egyptians believed that ignoring cosmic cycles invited chaos. The Maya saw time as an interlocking series of gears, a cosmic machine that must be understood to avoid catastrophe. The Sumerians warned that when humans overstepped the boundaries of wisdom, the gods withdrew. These warnings are not simply mythic morality tales. They hint at a principle. Contact is conditional. Humanity may receive guidance only until it becomes capable of shaping its own destiny, or until it poses a threat to itself and others. If that is true, then the silence of the last several thousand years is not abandonment. It is anticipation. But anticipation of what? The answer may lie in the culmination of all ancient narratives. Their portrayal of history is cyclical rather than linear. The world, they said, is not born once. It is born repeatedly, destroyed and renewed, shattered and rebuilt, forgotten and remembered. And in each new age, the beings from the sky play a role. They appear when the cycle turns. They teach, they warn, they withdraw, and they return when the next cycle begins. The Hopi speak of worlds destroyed by fire and flood, with each new world overseen by sky beings who ensure balance until humanity forgets. The Maya encoded 5 suns, 5 ages, each ending in catastrophe and renewal. Hindu cosmology describes yugas, vast cycles of creation and dissolution, where gods interact with humanity only at pivotal moments. The Dogons say the Nomo would return when cosmic alignments signal a new age. The Egyptians built their entire civilization around the concept of eternal recurrence, believing the first time would return in the last time. If these mythic cycles reflect real cosmic or environmental rhythms, comets, solar events, geomagnetic shifts, orbital resonances, then perhaps the sky visitors were not merely wanderers from another world, but participants in a larger cosmic order. Their interventions may have been responses to conditions that threatened humanity's survival. They may have appeared not out of charity, but necessity. And now, as we enter an era marked by global instability, rapid change, and unprecedented technological capability, these ancient cycles feel less symbolic and more prophetic. But prophecy is not certainty. Myth is not a roadmap. And the ancient visitors, whoever they were, left no manual, only clues scattered across continents, preserved in stone and story. The task of modern humanity is to interpret those clues, not through the lens of superstition, but through understanding. Scientific, historical, and perhaps even philosophical. We are not the first civilization to face existential thresholds. We may not be the first to seek connection with beings older and wiser. But we are the first with the tools to examine the past with clarity and the future with agency. What we choose to believe about the ancient visitors reveals less about them and more about who we are becoming. If we dismiss the possibility of ancient contact entirely, we risk ignoring a pattern that could guide us. If we embrace it blindly, we risk surrendering critical thought. But if we regard it as a mystery worthy of investigation, a convergence of myth, memory, and material evidence, then we step into a tradition as old as humanity, the pursuit of truth beyond the visible horizon. Perhaps the visitors will not return in the way ancient people imagined. Perhaps they operate on timescales we cannot comprehend. Perhaps they watch from a distance. Or perhaps they wait for a moment when humanity is ready, not to be taught, but to be understood as equals. If they return, it may not be in fiery chariots or radiant vessels. It may be through signals, through physics, through discoveries that force us to redefine consciousness itself. Or maybe the true return is metaphorical, a reawakening of memory rather than a reappearance of beings. Maybe humanity's rediscovery of the cosmos, our leap into space, our search for other worlds, is the fulfillment of a journey that began with those first encounters. Maybe the cycle continues, not through intervention, but through inheritance. What the ancient visitors sparked, humanity now continues. The sky that once opened may open again, or perhaps it never truly closed. Perhaps it is humanity that is finally opening, eyes lifting upward, ready to confront the truth our ancestors encoded in myth because they had no other means to preserve it. We do not know what comes next, but we know this. The story of our beginnings is deeper, stranger, and more expansive than we were taught. The ancient world tried to tell us. Through art, through architecture, through myths wrapped in the language of gods and monsters. They left us a message carved into the earth. You were not alone when you began, and the story is not finished. The question that remains is not whether the visitors existed, it is whether humanity is prepared for what happens when the cycle turns once more. Whether through cosmic return, dimensional crossing, or the awakening of knowledge long buried under the dust of forgotten ages. Somewhere in the vastness above us, or perhaps beside us in realities we cannot yet perceive, the echo of that ancient presence lingers. And as humanity steps into its next chapter, the sky may once again become a doorway, not to myth, but to memory restored.